So welcome everybody. I'd say we have about half as many people registered for this, which is kind of what I expected. Once it looks like work, the numbers drop off. But I also know that many people can't make it just because of scheduling, and we sort of randomly picked a day. So towards the end, I want to talk about scheduling for the future. But in the meantime, today, I want to talk, just give you a couple of notes to get started and let you know what we're doing, and of course, call for some volunteers. I will note, for the record, this meeting is being recorded, so if you don't want to be seen, turn off your camera. If you don't want to be heard, turn off your microphone. Otherwise, it will be recorded and posted publicly on the NSITSP site. So I encourage you to use the chat for links of things that are coming up or to share things. Also note, we've moved the draft code of ethics to the About page. And I say draft because I just made shit up, and right at some point, I'm hoping that there will be a committee who will look at that and some other things and sort of give us guidance with regard to clarity on mission, vision, and actions. Just a note, the last week the only real surprise I had from the last meeting was how overwhelmed I was trying to clear out all the messaging systems on Earth after that meeting. The way to get a hold of me is email, period, end of story. I have employees who might occasionally see activity on some of these other channels, but I don't follow them, I don't watch them, I don't respond on them. And if you need me, email is the way to go. Oddly enough, I may be the only person who cares about this, but we're in this world where there's this diaspora of how we can communicate. And I think everybody needs to control how they want to be communicated with. For me, it's email. So if you send me an AOL instant message, I will not receive it. One time, a friend of mine, I popped into some chat room by accident, and he literally instantly popped up and said, "Are you lost?" Because he knows that's not what I do. So the site continues to grow. Anyone who is on this call who has not registered as a member, please go register. And so we have that growing list. I think we have close to 300, or maybe it's over 300 by now. And that's an area where we're going to post up recordings and resources and so forth. The 9 pillars, so those of you who haven't seen it, it's not any kind of a constitution or anything. These are my thoughts on where we're getting started and why I started doing this in the first place. And it is my goal to grow a group who does a lot of stuff, and it's more than lobbying. It's interesting. I've had just a handful of people who have been visible on social media who have resisted this. And one very common thread is people who say that we are naive, and that if you go down this road, ultimately what's going to happen is there will be some kind of official certification, and then there will be training, and then there will be continuing education, and you'll continually raise the bar of what constitutes entry into this profession. And my only response is, yes. I don't think I'm naive at all. I think that's where we need to go. And we have too many people in this industry who are amateurs and wish to stay amateurs forever. We also have some bad actors who want to stay bad actors. And I think we need to make that more difficult. So I am very much interested in professionalism within this industry. And I think a lot of the response from people who were here last time is that that's exactly what appealed to them. And the legislation is sort of a thing that's sort of time bound because of where we are with regard to certain issues, but it's not the big picture. A second kind of, I guess, opposition that's out there is that people are saying, well, I'm already professional. You can't make me any more professional. And I have to just say, that's not the point. The people who are here, who are very, very professional and take pride in that, live in a community where there are people who register their client software in their own name and don't give their clients their passwords, and sell the same piece of hardware 3 times and sell used stuff as new. And, all right. Some of you, many of the people on this call, started out like me. I think the first 20 jobs I did constituted cleaning up systems that had been set up by people who didn't know what they were doing. And that unfortunately still happens. And, 25, 30 years later, there's absolutely no excuse for our industry to still have so many people operating that way. Some people think that we're trying to unionize. I'm not sure where that came from. Again, one of the things that happens is we start moving down a certain road, and a lot of the people who come in at the second wave haven't read any of the stuff, haven't seen any webinars, didn't attend the first meeting. So they're responding to a simple blog post or a simple note on Facebook or LinkedIn, and they are not responding to the bigger picture. So obviously, part of what we need to do is to have a committee to help get the message out. One of the big things I want to talk about today is the next steps, and that includes forming committees. So I created a form that I would appreciate it if everybody could fill out. What I want to do is try to gather up a list of people who actually want to serve on a board of directors, on a committee chairmanship, or as a committee member, a state chair, a state member, and try to begin to put that together. Movements like this frequently start with whoever raises their hand first gets in, and then we put together a temporary structure and begin moving towards elections and having a more permanent structure. But we have to start somewhere. So it always starts out a little less democratic than it will end up in the end. So we have a small group of I guess a steering committee / board of directors that includes Eric Simpson, Amy Babinchek, and Rianne Buccianico. And we want to grow that, but we need to be deliberate, and we need to make sure that we involve you in this process. And again, there's always kind of that balance of how you do something like that with the membership association. But if you'll fill out that form, we'll get a definitive list of people who actually want to serve. And then there will be some kind of process to say, okay, here's an application, and we will contact the people who have stepped up. Some people want to serve, but they don't have an interest in being on a board. They don't have an interest of being a committee chair. And that's totally cool. At this point, we need all kinds of stuff. Last time, I was thoroughly impressed with how many people offered services of legal services and financial services and lobbying advice and organizational advice and so forth. And so we have a huge amount of talent. And it's funny, we don't have to go an extra layer out to find all the talent we need. Between this call and the last call, I think we have it all. So please help me with that next step, which is the committees. I think what we probably want to do is to take a little time and do some organizing and then set up the next meeting. So I think what you should keep an eye out for is I just set my doodle so that I can get 1,000 people to fill out a form and request a day. So it's impossible to choose a day when everybody can be here, and me just randomly picking a day is obviously not the best choice. So we'll figure out some kind of process for choosing when the next meeting will be. But again, for people who actually want to get involved and are willing to dedicate some time, if you'll fill out that form, I will greatly appreciate it. And it's a very simple form, and we don't ask for address and all that kind of stuff. It's just the information we need. Again, I am currently running, all that through my company. So If you have permanently removed yourself from my weekly newsletter, that's cool. Just know that if you removed yourself from receiving communications from me, you won't get the emails from that as well. So you need to add yourself to that list. I cannot add you back on, but I can help walk you through it if you get in touch with me by email. So with that, we had a lot of content that came into the forums, and I want to make sure that people have an opportunity to talk about the things that they want to do. One of the other things that we need to talk about, and it's again too early to get too deep into the weeds, but is funding. And as one of the people that I've been talking with mentioned, you can't get too deep into funding until you tell people what the money's going for. So, we need to develop a preliminary kind of budget, but clearly there are expenses related to even the basics of keeping this going, having some communication tools. There's fairly minor expenses, and I'm funding that right now through my business, but obviously there's a limit to that. I'm happy to do what I can, but and eventually, if we're going to have nationwide and international organizations and meetings and so forth, there will be some expenses. I don't think it'll be very expensive. I don't think we're ever, I can't see us ever having a hired director who gets $400,000 a year. That's certainly not my vision of where we're going. I think the focus is on the community and on professionalism, but deciding what that means and where it goes does take some organization and take some administrative skills. I wish I had an extra 20-hour employee in the last week just for that. So anyway, that's what I had, and I am happy to see that there's some chat activity. I haven't really looked at it yet, but I am open to your discussions about next steps and committee organization and so forth. So with that, I'll take my screen down, but if people have links, put them in the chat. Anybody? You're free to open your microphone.
Hi, Carl. Can you guys hear me?
We can. I was looking through, I have 49 faces on my screen.
So in the chat where questions are, do we have a list of committees that people can volunteer for?
So we don't yet. So the reason I want people to fill out that form is that we have a lot of committees that people have mentioned in the forums, but I want to get a full list and then have a group look at that list. The board sort of look at that list and determine which committees we need to start first and second and third, and then move from there. But first, I'm going to get a list of the hive mind of what all the committees are that we should have eventually.
Okay.
But I see, Rayanne, that you've already been volunteered for committee chair.
Yeah,
I think that was voluntold.
Well, I've told many people, if there's anybody that I would ever need that knows finances and managed services and how to deal with the PSA, literally that Venn diagram, as far as I know, gets me Rayanne Buccianico. So there may be another one out there, but I haven't met her.
Neither have I, but if you do meet her or him, just introduce us so I can hire them. So the next question up on the screen seems to be the meetings. And you mentioned about not scheduling the next meeting until we get something off the ground. Is that probably right?
Yeah, I'm thinking it'll probably be like 2 weeks. Last time somebody threw out, well, we should meet every week. And at first, that sounded great, but it requires a great deal of activity in a very short period of time while we're trying to, put the structure together. So I think we need enough breathing room to come into, have the next meeting have a much fuller, more organized schedule with actual asks and, people, I want to figure out what the nominating process is, figure out how we begin to build this. Any organization takes time, so we just need to figure out how much time we need.
So Tim Golden suggests that we get the committees established with the chairs and then define the cadence, right? So, and I think that's a great plan. So as people are starting to fill out this form and suggesting different committees, how are we going to communicate that with them?
Well, at some point, again, I'm going to rely on the steering committee to sort of look at that. And, there might be 200 different committees proposed. So we got to figure out, clearly there are some fairly obvious ones in terms of a committee to deal with the organizational structure and look at bylaws. And, there's another committee for looking at defining the actual code of ethics and the mission, vision, and purpose. I know what I want the purpose to be, and it's on the about page, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be written in stone. So again, I'm trying to balance the pushing things as quickly as possible and getting input from the community.
Hey, Carl, and on your slide, you showed a organizational logo as well as a California logo. What's up with that?
Oh, just when I first started out, I registered both of those names because I'm happy being in California to help organize the California contingent to actually go start working on talking to legislators and committee members and so forth. So I'm just running them both out of my office for now.
So is it your vision then that each state would have a similar independent organization? It looks independent from the national.
So one of the things we need to look at is that I don't want anybody to just randomly take this name and say, we are that, and then go do other things that are unrelated or, to be honest, less professional. So one of the comments in last week's chat was about using subdomains so that you might have, for example, CA for California .NSITSP.org. And so we can create that as a subdomain. And that way we would say, okay, if you've met these criteria and you've pledged that these are your goals and these are, what you want to do, then we will allow you to use our subdomain. That way we control that simply through DNS, but people have to pledge to actually be consistent with our goals at a larger level. But if somebody just wants to start something up and push the same goals, I'm certainly not opposed to that. I just think that the more we are centrally located, the easier it's going to be.
Well, and ultimately, the more power you have.
Right. I mean, at some level, one of the things people talked about is, well, there should be a piece where you join the membership and some little fee goes to the state and some little fee goes to the national. And I don't know if that's what we'll do, but that sort of organization makes it easy to say, that the national organization is the one that, sort of structurally organizes everything for everybody else.
I think we have to decide, what we are. If we're a nonprofit, you need certain committees. You need people that are familiar with forming and running 501(c)(3)s. If we're going to be lobby, you need people that are familiar with that on the formation. And you have to have some standard committees that, they sound more dominant in structure than they really are overall. And they really don't, you have to have some committees that are needed for a 501(c)(3), and they may just meet a few times a year. So I think the first step is, defining the structure. I would see it as and that's the beauty of doing it state by state. is
Well,
each state
so-
has different regulations.
So just so you know, we have formed a 501c6, which is a membership
Okay.
Correct.
association.
Yeah, I was gonna point out it needed to be a C6, not a C3.
And as Rayanne pointed out, part of the benefit of that is if there are dues, they're actually better for your taxes as dues than if you were trying to take a
Veritable
nonprofit
production.
donation. So
So we have not completed the application for the C6. We've just merely incorporated as a nonprofit, and you know, we were waiting for the initial, you know, forming board before I take it to the next step and start filling out the 1023.
and I don't see Larry Mandelberg here. He might be, but last time he mentioned that, you know, he's worked with several boards and that the sort of 9 to 13 members is a good number. All I know is enough to know that it should be an odd number of members so that the majority is very clear and obvious.
It's typical that boards are usually split in terms half and half as well. So half remain, half are elected for the next term.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
then
Yeah.
the following year, the flip it.
Or even more staggered.
Yeah. 2 or
Yeah,
3 year
or-
terms.
So Carl asked about Canada, and there was Peter was on here from South Africa last time. And yeah, so other countries, we have to figure out exactly what we want to do, but we want you to be involved in this. I don't know that I have the bandwidth to create an intergalactic organization, but if we can create a model that works in other countries, I'm happy to do that as well. I do think ultimately that there needs to be this same activity any place where IT professionals are working, which at this point is every nation on earth except North Korea. Other comments or questions?
Yeah, I have a question, and it's more clarification on my brain. When we talk about the membership or the goal, I'm seeing on the About page both talking about organizational entities as well as individual entities. So is there going to be a difference in terms of what the goal is for an employee of an MSP versus an MSP in terms of what they're committing to, and then in terms of a person whose job it is, they work for a traditional MSP client, in other words, a network administrator at a manufacturing company?
Well, so part of this is that we have a lot of education, but we don't have a lot of standardized education. And I don't know that at this point in the evolution of our community that's even possible. But I do think that it's possible to say that there are certain levels where we would say, we want somebody to have a basic understanding of what is managed services, whether they choose to do managed services or not. And so I think there are ways for us to develop systems to say, these guys, you know, all of these different training groups have something that we think is appropriate as a training. So I want to increase the number of IT professionals who get training on the business side as well as technology. The technology side is kind of taken care of by manufacturers and developers. But on the business side, I think we need to have a way to say, you know, like many industries have lots of different organizations that are authorized to provide continuing education. And so I'd like to see something along those lines. Obviously, that needs to be figured out and mapped out and developed. In terms of businesses, there's lots of ideas, and I've been exchanging emails with lots of people about, you know, different ways to structure the membership so that both organizations and individuals would be members. Most of the IT pros are, that are associated here work with very small companies. And so the person is, there's might be 5 people in the company, but only one is the owner and they're the obvious member. If you work for a much larger organization, to be honest, they have their own stuff. And I don't anticipate having, 1,500 engineers from Intel become members of this. Nor do I particularly expect Intel or HP to be members of this. In many ways, I want to address, at least from me and my perspective, I want to address the problems of small and medium-sized IT companies serving small and medium-sized customers.
So Carl, if we can just, just define the action steps for today's call, right? So step number 1, complete the form, and I've posted the link in the chat window. What are steps number 2 and 3 for the members that we are looking for?
Well, the biggest thing is to fill out the form and help us identify who wants to serve so that we can start actually organizing committees. That's the biggie. If people have ideas, I appreciate any activity in the forums on the website, just in terms of ways to structure membership or requirements. One question that nobody has brought up publicly, but I've gotten several emails on, and that is, what is the role of vendors in this? Should we have vendors on the board? Should we invite members to be vendors to be members? Or are vendors simply folks that we would like to rely on to support us with money, but they don't get a vote?
Well,
Carl, I would say, I think it's a good idea to have some, I'm gonna say have vendors be a part of this, because as an MSP, we rely on them as much as, I'm walking a very fine line. We rely on them as they rely on us. And there are some of them that we rely on more heavily. And I think that if we involve them, I think they would become a better asset to the MSP versus a liability to the MSP.
My only concern with that, Lisa, I think with, like if we invite Microsoft, because let's face it, Microsoft is one of our largest vendors.
Right.
The concern I think there would be that they would take over and tell us, what we should, how we should run things, or, what the regulation should say, based on their needs, and not necessarily the needs of small businesses or IT professionals.
And I agree with you on that, Rayanne. And you're going to the tip of the iceberg on that one, but I think there's some of the other vendors down a little bit.
Oh,
That's why I was saying I'm walking a fine line here. So I agree with you. Yes.
Like Rayanne is technically a vendor, and kind of so is third tier. But my concern with vendors in the group is that I think we should have them, but I think we need to carefully carve out a space for them, probably in the organizational bylaws of the group. Because if we look at CompTIA, it's really been taken over by vendors, and in my opinion is not good at representing the majority of its membership at this point, because the vendors are so dominant in that organization. It's made them ineffective.
Well, and there are other organizations that basically they exist to collect vendors and then, get enough IT pros to let the vendors give them enough money so that they can fund their organization. That's their business model. I don't anticipate that as our business model. I think vendors as members, if Microsoft has one vote, I'm okay with that. I wouldn't see them having an outweighted vote simply because they outweigh everybody else in the room.
Well, if you look at CompTIA's committees, of which I've been on a few, and I've been on the executive board of some of those committees, they were all dominated. The committee boards or committee, the executive committees, that's the word I'm looking for, managing those committees were far dominated by vendors. So, you would have, 8 people on the committee and 6 of them were vendors. And I really think that we need to avoid that, so that if vendors are going to participate, and I would like them to, but I think they need to be controlled somehow through our bylaws, maybe vendors not as board chairs, maybe vendors not as, in the controlling influence, but just simply as members at large, something like that.
Yeah, and I think too, I've been running across, I just came out of a summit here in Atlanta, which was nice because several of the vendors were previous MSPs. They were MSPs to begin with, and they kind of went into a specialty. And I find that those people, to me, and of course I'm not been around as long as most of you, I found that to be more of a good relationship because they now have walked the walk I'm walking, versus a Microsoft or somebody huge. And I agree with you, Amy, with the vendors trampling on the CompTIA aspect.
Jen Morrison, did you have a comment?
I did. Thank you. I'm actually driving, so I participate in the chat. But, the idea that vendors aren't going to be a part or shouldn't be a part of this organization, I think is a little naive, and that, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, the point of the organization in general is to help steer the conversation of upcoming legislation issues. And if we don't think that Microsoft's not going to be a part of that anyway, or any other major vendor, we might as well have them with us and not, necessarily being a larger voice somewhere else.
Right. Well,
that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. I think that the one of the best roles of vendors is that vendors need professional, successful IT service providers, right? They need to eventually support organizations that help them get the people who can actually distribute their products and so forth and so on. One of the things that we have is the ability early on to define different types of members. So you could have free members who get certain benefits, paid members who get other benefits, vendor members who get other benefits, and each of those can have different requirements. Eventually, I guess my dream is that someday those requirements will begin to notch up. Many of you on this call have been in the past Microsoft certified partners. And one of the best things they ever implemented, in my opinion, was getting letters of rec from your clients and documenting projects that you'd actually completed. I don't know that we need to do that, but it's the kind of thing where I could see us saying, well, there is a level of membership where you've demonstrated this level of ability to actually do the things that we define as professional, not yet defined. So Dan, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, not to minimize us as MSPs, but the vendors will have a greater level of clout and possibly connections than most of us as MSPs have. And I think the concern that is being brought up about vendors is probably that, the vendors' contributions financially would provide them with advertising, and it's going to be interface and all that. And as long as that's not the intent, in that their contributions to being a member, just like an MSP's contributions of being a member, are for the greater good of our community as an MSP, it shouldn't matter that a vendor is involved. So that's just my 2 cents on that part.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I have no fear that vendors will dominate, take over, or do anything that we don't want them to do, you know, so.
You
but
allow them, they'll do it.
Well, but I mean, Microsoft, as far as I can tell, has lots of ability to affect the market that they work in without us, without being part of this or to trying to dominate committees or anything like that. And at the same time, there's a lot of smaller vendors who, and we talk about not having a seat at the table. There's a lot of small vendors who they don't have anybody representing them. And so maybe this is a place for them to get some of that as well.
Well, to be clear, since I brought up this mouse hole, that, you know, I'm not talking about excluding vendors from the group. I think they're important, but I think we should be cautious. So we can look at CompTIA's example, having gone before us, to make sure that we don't fall into the trap that they find themselves in.
Well, my experience goes a lot further than that because I'm old and I was very much involved with DPMA, the Data Processing Management Association, which was a national, international IT professional, whatever, extremely old. And that was it. Essentially, they had chapters, all that. They actually did do certifications for IT professionals. They came up with, I think, 3 of them. There was CDP, CSP, and I forget what the third one was. This is even before PCs were in existence. Okay, but they tried to do it as to have some vendor-free standard professional conduct. It was basically they're trying to carbon copy the CPA and all that. And it was I don't want to say it was a disaster, but it didn't go anywhere. And part of the reason I think was they did lousy PR in terms of really defining what this brought and what it brought in terms of employers valuing or seeing value in people having these certifications. DPMA ultimately crashed and burned. It then combined with another group called the AITP, did this about 15, 20 years ago, became a national organization. That also crashed and burned, and then was rescued by CompTIA. And CompTIA then tried to turn that, I think they've renamed it, but they're trying to turn that into a professional organization on the IT side as well. The certification side has completely gone off. I think CompTIA has an absolute great infrastructure. I think they have great resources. They just use them very, very poorly. I used to participate in their annual DC fly-in. I did that about 4 or 5 times, and until they canceled that a couple of years ago. So anyway, rant off.
I mean, the vendors are going to, I was going to say the vendors are going to want to donate or pay for ads because you're going to have hundreds or hopefully hundreds of MSPs at their fingertips. It's like any other organization that they buy ad space on. This shouldn't be much different than that. You allow them to come in and start making rules and mucking the waters. It's going to cause issues. I think the organization needs to be formed first with the MSPs, actual goals in place and what we can do, like you said, Carl, to eliminate the hacks that are out there, the one-man show that crops up on Craigslist that wants to fix somebody's computer for $50 here and there on, in a parking lot, versus companies like all of us that have been around for 20 plus years, or even the new guys that are starting up, that actually care about the clients, that actually know what they're doing out in the industry. The vendor piece of it, they come after the fact, after all of our pockets are saying, okay, we could use a little bit of a break now. Then you utilize the vendors and you let them in sparingly to help the cause, not to drive the cause to whatever their particular motives would be, because obviously they're going to be different than ours.
Right.
Eric,
Well, I
did you
mean, yeah, what I was going to add was, I think we should at least look and understand how an organization like AICPA exists. I because you go to their site, there's no vendor stock. I mean, there's a little bit of you know, here's the industry publications, but not it's not a vendor ad space. You know, and if we're trying to encourage having professionals, you know, this becomes no different. You know, the trunk slammer becomes the unlicensed bookkeeper in the accounting world, the unlicensed bookkeeper, or you know, whatever other services you can hire somebody to do that are accounting related, where somebody who's an AICPA member is that professional that we're trying to create here. And, you know, unfortunately, at the end of the day, you probably have you know, in a typical CPA firm, you have people who are licensed CPAs, you have bookkeepers who are overseen. I mean, no different than a license, you know, a contractor. Somebody has the license, and there are other people besides that person necessarily that do the work, but the person who is licensed becomes the responsible entity for that organization. And I think that's the kind of structure that we're looking to build. Am I mistaken?
No, that's exactly what I've pictured too, Eric.
Yeah. So I think we got to be real careful about vendor influence. You know, we'll happily take their money. I'm not sure that they should have a lot of influence over how the organization is created, because at the end of the day, they probably do have to become a member. You know, HP's consulting organization probably needs, you know, if we're gonna be holding ourselves out as professionals, we need to be, you know, everybody's got to have a level playing field.
I would also say there are some vendors, and I've been happy to work with a number of them, who have a sincere interest in improving the business side of the IT business. You know, that they sponsor
Absolutely.
classes and they do trainings, and you know, they bring people from all over, and they do more than just say, here's how to use our product, right?
Right.
Right. And, you know, I just want to throw one other thing out too, is that when someone brought up vendors and advertising, I think you know, and let me just first off apologize. I wasn't on last week's call because I was having my surgery, but, you know, as long as the intent of the organization is, you know, as far as what we've been talking about is with regulations and standards and such, you know, the vendors are more or less just helping to build the, you know, the foundation and structure for us, or actually pay for that. Much like, you know, if you're in a hospital and you see, like I was in the hospital, and, you know, the lobby or the waiting area, you know, had a plaque that it was donated by so-and-so. You know, I think those dollars from the vendors, you know, can be recognized, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in an advertising format. Is just recognize that they're contributing to help us, you know, just for the greater good of our industry.
Any
Yeah,
vendors?
I would say that, you know, one thing that bothers me, and is where we profile them. All vendors are, and we're professional. We're supposed to be professionals, and if we can't control the direction of the organization, it's kind of useless from the beginning. So the fact that we fear vendors causes me some reservation. Vendors are part of our toolkit, and we better communicate with them in a way that we want them to meet the same level of service delivery that we do. That's just my opinion. Having a vendor here is, I don't find intimidating in the slightest. If they take over, it's because we were weak. Just my opinion.
I have to say, I don't think anybody's actually saying that we shouldn't have vendors. I don't think anybody's in fear of vendors. So
That's it. What?
The question is, from vendors who are here, you know, what do you think of this? And I think there's a positive role for vendors to play.
Hey, Carl, I'll speak out for at least one vendor.
You could just move it like right.
Dan, you're unmuted.
There we go. So I'll speak out for one vendor. A lot of good points being made here. And for those who don't know me, I was an MSP for 16 years. So I've got a good deal of experience on both sides of the fence. But, you know, we're an ecosystem. We all need each other. Vendors know that. MSPs know that. We're not operating in a mutually exclusive swim lane. You know, vendors need partners and partners need tools and products to deliver services around. So I think that there are plenty of vendors out there that really understand that. There's some that are predatory. I've experienced that too. But just like the whole purpose of this organization being formed, there are some service providers out there that are really doing a disservice because they're not acting professionally. And then there's others that really do. So I think we have a lot of common ground, and I think it's absolutely appropriate to lean on each other for support. You know, clearly vendors have a budget. Some value spending that budget to help partners grow and be better. And that's mutually beneficial to everybody. It's mutually beneficial for the partner. And it's beneficial for us as vendors to have good, strong, healthy, bottom line partners selling product and services. So I say move forward with it. You know, just be careful. Create a program that's mutually beneficial, right? Give vendors an opportunity to support this community, this ecosystem effort, but do it in a way that is mutually beneficial for the group too. I don't think it's unreasonable to expect vendors to support it. And you don't need to let vendors take over. Frankly, you know, Microsoft doesn't have time to assign somebody full-time to infiltrate this group and do something bad. That's not going to happen.
Right. I also think there's a lot of vendors who understand the small end of the market. Microsoft, you know, and I love Microsoft, I own stock, blah, blah, blah. But Microsoft will always do exactly and only what is in their best interest for the next 3 months. And, you know, after the next quarter, well, then they might just unplug everything and do something else. At the smaller end, there are vendors who understand this market and want to do what is in the very long-term best interest of the SMB market. And those vendors behave very differently. They engage long-term and they don't just randomly change their programs. So in some ways, you know, if we can build a resource that's valuable to them, they can help us build a resource that's valuable to us. So we only have about 12 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we try to end on time. The final thing I wanted to talk about, make sure that we get it out there, is that before we get membership going, we still have a few things where we could use some money to get organized. And so I think that we're going to try to figure out a way to put up something on the website where people can basically make a donation knowing that it's going to a professional association. We'll keep track of the money and report back. But it will not be, you know, I don't think we're ready to say what a membership is and how much it costs and so forth, but just a place where people can, you know, give a little something, kind of not a Patreon, since we actually have a way to collect money, but that sort of concept of being able to contribute something and sort of help kickstart things. So when that happens, I'll send out a note as well.
Somebody had asked earlier in the chat, you know, what kind of expenses we've already experienced. And, you know, Carl, I know that you've put out, you know, some personal money to get the website up and running and, you know, and all of that. And I've put, you know, I put out a couple of dollars so far, you know, just to incorporate the organization.
Yeah, well, I mean, the obvious things that you can all see are, we have some domain names, some, you know, communications, hosting, web development. My web developer is an outsourced employee of mine, but I think she can tell you, but I think she was 3/4 time building the website for about 3 weeks. So there's a significant outlay of money there. But I'm happy to do it. I mean, I've allocated a significant chunk of money to help support this organization through the end of the year. And just so you know, my personal timeline is that I would hope by the end of the year that we've got it all, we've got the structure in place and we're ready to hit the ground running. And I know that seems like a long time to some people, but the weeks slip away very, very quickly. So we have, and we're not doing any advertising or anything like that, but web development and just the administrative support to be able to do this. It's not hundreds of thousands, but it's dozens of thousands. So and I think that there'll be no problem. The money that I have pledged from my personal business will take us through the end of the year. But beyond that, we'll have to see. So any questions about funding and being able to support? I do thank you to the people who have pledged already, Bob and Jay, and I've had other people contact me, and I think everybody knows it takes money to do stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, realistically, what do you think we need through that organizational phase, Carl, financially? Well,
So I have allocated $25,000 from my company. So I quite realistically, I think that's what I expect it will cost between now and the end of the year. So if I get assistance with that, well, that'll be okay too. I'm not.
Well, we got to get it. I'm not sure that we get to the finish line by the end of the year. Creating an organization probably, but I think the finish line is going to be in a different place.
No, I mean,
upon the
when I
state
say
you're
finish
in
line, I mean,
right.
We've got a board, we've got committees, we've got some structure, we can hold elections,
They're prime in the pump.
we
Right.
basically, we move from a steering committee to, a membership association. So, and, Rayanne is out of pocket for some stuff as well, for the filing paperwork and all that. And anyway, so we will make it happen. I think there's enough energy in the last couple of calls and the chat. Last time it took me 2 days to filter through everything. The chat was over 3,000 words. So you guys wrote a couple of nice articles in Channel Pro with that. By the way, we have been getting some decent press, so tell your friends and neighbors and promote the word. And if anybody has any questions anytime during the week, send me an email. And if you have ideas, if you say, hey, this is a structure that works, we'll be happy to take it. Please fill out the form to volunteer, and also give us feedback on which committees we should create.
Right. Just only because Amy, you kind of stepped in here and took a little vendor role. Do you think it's unreasonable to expect or get vendors to throw $5,000 at it without knowing what necessarily where it's headed?
I don't think that's unreasonable, and I'd think higher.
Well, I would think high. I'm trying to be, but I mean, I'm trying to be conservative. But what is that? You're in that vendor space. You get 10 or 20 vendors to throw a few bucks at it.
Yeah, you're hitting a decent pool of money at that point. I think there's plenty of vendors that would be willing to support this initiative. It's something that has been needed for a very long time. And I'd be hard pressed to think of a vendor who wouldn't at least see the value. Now, whether they'll actually cut a check, that's a whole different ballgame, because there needs to be some kind of program, like I mentioned, that's mutually beneficial. But the ultimate benefit, if you keep the messaging the way you're starting to, which is, we vendors need professional, profitable, well-run partners. Like it's in our best interest to support that however we can. So kind of keep that messaging wrapped around that core value. I think you'll attract all kinds of vendors, frankly. And I'm happy to help, like, form a program or, give my opinion. Everybody's got opinions, but on how to make it attractive for vendors and how to deliver some benefit to them that isn't necessarily handing over a bunch of power to drive where this organization goes. This is MSP driven, like clearly MSP driven, and that's the way it should stay. I think it's possible to get there, though.
It's funny, I had an experience with a vendor about a dozen years ago where they had spent a massive amount of money and they had accumulated about 1,500 partners who over the course of 6 months sold 1 unit of their product. And so they were like, okay, how do I get vendors who are actually going to participate and sell and so forth and so on? And so, they were eagerly looking for somebody who was going to actually do what they said they were going to do. So clearly there are people in this space who are not professional and there are people who are. And we need to make it more appealing to be able to say, I want to be professional instead of, I don't want to be regulated and you guys are trying to unionize me and, don't make me take an exam. There will always be those people, but I think it needs to be okay to say, hey, we're going to step up to the next level.
Well, and historically, I mean, if you look at the last 15, 20 years, there have been a couple entities that have tried to do this, kind of tried to organize MSPs, whether it's through certification or trust marks or different avenues. And the one thing that they didn't have was literally MSP leadership. It wasn't done by MSPs, it was done by vendors. And it was ultimately done to sell more licenses of whatever their product was. So this is starting from the heart of where this channel is, the MSPs. So I think this will be successful. I have no doubt.
Well, good. I hope you are correct.
Worth the risk.
So, well, I absolutely appreciate everybody being here and participating. And so the next step from my perception is we're going to collect the committee information. We're going to start building out that structure. Watch for some kind of email about how we're going to, pick the next date and time. My super strong bias is that I hold business meetings during business hours, so it will not be Saturday at 7 p.m. So I have a business meetup locally that I totally love, except they meet it Saturday, and I'm like, Saturday I'm picking weeds or painting a fence or something, so I'm not available. But anyway, I think that's it. If you have future comments, please go to the forums and make comments there. If you have questions for me, send me an email. I appreciate your time, and by my watch, we have about 30 seconds left. Anybody else want to say anything? Keith, that was a slow pitch.
Puppies are cool.
Thanks for
Puppies
pushing
are cool.
Carl.
Okay. All right. Thank you all. I will get up the recording as quickly as Kara can. And thank you. And we will see you online. I appreciate you being here.